Good evening. This is part three of Eternal Human Vices, the Megillah, where we explore topics, sort of the fun sort of parts of life, and as they play out in the story in the Megillah, from beauty and intimacy and materialism, and of course, addiction and substance abuse. All of these, among other great topics, juicy topics, play a role, not just a tangential role, but a pivotal role in the story of the Megillah. And I want to speak about this topic, and I'm going to share that I was able to write an article for the recent CRC Purim publication. You may have seen it. Much of what we're covering, although not all of it, from tonight is in that article. I'm going to go a little bit into some of the halachos of Ad Lo Yada tonight that I did not delve into in the article. But I want to give whoever wants to review afterwards some of the themes we discussed an opportunity to check out that article as well. So Purim in its very essence is a holiday that is quite extreme in nature. So I want to show you a few examples. If you look at the mitzvahs hayom, the mitzvahs hayom are the four mems, which include Mishteh, Megillah, Matanos Avyonim, and Mishloach Manos. And each of these mitzvos, the way they're codified in halacha, are supposed to be fulfilled in sort of the maximal, most extreme kind of way. So Shulchan Aruch writes, Ein medaktin most purim. Normally, the Torah tells us that we don't ask questions when it comes to tzedakah of Purim. Now, the Gemara has a lengthy discussion in several occasions where it talks about how normally money for tzedakah, you have to make sure you do so in a more responsible fashion. You have to make sure the recipient is worthy, is honest, is not a charlatan of any form. But when it comes to most Purim, it seems like anyone is accepted. Most Purim ella kol mi sheposhet yado litol nostim lo. Whoever extends his hand, you give it to him. Af le'eni Yehudin nosnin. And the poskim are preoccupied with this part of the Shulchan Aruch, that even where there are customs in certain communities where they give tzedakah even to Gentiles, so they should still do so as well on Purim. And obviously that creates a lot of excitement. People want to know, what should we do? Is this a mitzvah? Is it not a mitzvah by Goyim? But I'm actually focused on the first part. The first part is this extreme nature of a mitzvah in medaktik and most Purim. We don't go over the top. We don't investigate. We don't start to scrutinize the worthiness of the recipient. Instead, we just hand it them. Now, take a look at the Aruch HaShulchan when it comes to the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. How do we read the Megillah? And this is actually an interesting Aruch HaShulchan that comes up in the whole question of women's Megillah readings, but not just women's Megillah readings, but also private Megillah readings in general. One of the questions, the side questions that we deal with outside of the different levels of chiyuv that might exist for men and women, that's the machlokas haposkim. But the central question, which has nothing to do with level of chiyuv, is should we really be creating multiple minyanim for Mikra Megillah, right? So assuming that a man cannot fulfill his obligation with a woman's reading of Megillah, which is the assumption of many poskim. So assuming that's the case, so then you would have to have a man read the Megillah for the men. So the question is at that point, should we even be entertaining Megillah readings on the side, whether it's women's Megillah readings, little niche group Megillah readings, fast Megillah readings, no nonsense ones, nonsense Megillah readings? Should we just do a giant Megillah reading? So if you look at the Aruch HaShulchan, he writes that the Rambam and the Ma'arif and the Rosh, the Ramban, Mizbar Devada Lihidur Mitzvah L'Firsume Nisa, for the purpose of glorifying the mitzvah, for the purpose of Pirsume Nisa, of publicizing the miracle, Gam Rav Modida Asara Adif. Rav agrees. The shita of Rav is that 10 is better. If you have a choice between a private reading and a public one, you should try to go to the public reading. That's the minhag olam chol ma sheyesh yoser tzibor have a yoser hider. More people in the tzibor, the better it is for hider, for glorification of the mitzvah. The berov am hadros melech, because with an abundant nation, that's where the glory, the hider of the king, and it's obviously a play because the Megillah reading is all about the story of the king and the king behind the scenes. And so you should try to read it in a way in which it'll be read in a public fashion. He talks about don't you should read it if it's going to im bebeis hakneses efshar lishma betuv mipnei habilbul shalakos Haman. If it's impossible to hear it because of Bilbul, it's not Bilbo Baggins, sorry, Bilbul, the confusion of the shouting Haman, if that's going to happen, then okay, you can read it privately. But if all is equal, if you can maximize the number of participants, then optimally everyone should try to participate in the biggest possible Mikra Megillah. Now, this is interesting because we seem to emphasize this as being a key criteria of Mikra Megillah more so than we do by other minyanim, right? The trend more and more to have privatized minyanim, to have little minyanim, niche minyanim, that certainly is not in the spirit of halacha when it comes to Mikra Megillah. So we do it in a maximal kind of way. And the Rambam writes, not only that, when it comes to Mishloach Manos, Kol Amar B'Lishloach Rei, Mishulach outside an Avel who you should not be giving out according to Mishnah Berurah to everyone, just to one person, but all of us should be giving as many Mishloach Manos as we can, as much tzedakah as we can. If you have a choice between tzedakah or Mishloach Manos, tzedakah takes precedence. But the point is, we're turning up the volume on everything we're doing on Purim. And the fourth mem, Mishloach Manos, Matanas Avyonim, Megillah, and then Mishteh, the feast, is also along these lines. So we know that we're supposed to have a festive Seudah. We saw at Mincha Marav today, Machlokes HaPoskim. Is that the manifestation of Simchas Purim, or is it Simchas Purim all day long? But everyone agrees that Mishteh and Simcha, that the Simcha of Purim is sort of expressed most robustly and most fundamentally at the Seudah, at the feast that we're having. So if you look at the Gemara, it's a famous Gemara in Zainam and Beis in Maseches Megillah, Amar Rava. Rava says in some Argar say Rabba. It's easy to see why the Girsaos, the versions of the Gemara, got confused between Rava and Rabba. It's one letter off, Hey and Aleph. So Amar Rava, Michayiv inish lebesumi b'puri adol yoda ben Or Haman levarach morach. It's a famous line. They've made many songs about this. Chayiv inish lebesume. And it's much to the delight of many people out there that we have a chiyuv, we have a halachic obligation to partake in bisumi, means to become intoxicated on Purim, until you don't know the difference between Or Haman and Baruch Mordechai. Leave sume, Rashi says, lishtaker beyayin, to become intoxicated with wine. Rashi seems to insist on wine and not other, because wine was the drink of choice at the Seudah of Achashverosh, how we commemorate this event. But before we go into various explanations, the simple explanation is that a person is obligated to get drunk on Purim until he doesn't know the difference between Baruch Mordechai and Or Haman. And I'm not going to go into it, but the poskim do distinguish between the conduct of men and women with alcohol, understanding probably that many people have been taken advantage of and, God forbid, abused in the context of women becoming intoxicated in the presence of men. And so, but that's later. That's a discussion for a different time. I want to focus on this bizarre obligation. It really is a strange obligation. Why would the Chazal tell you to get completely plastered on Purim? So, in general, our attitude toward drinking and substances is one which leaves much to be desired. The Sanya Rabbi Omer, this is the very beginning of Maseches Sota. Sota is the story of the woman who left her husband, who betrayed her husband, and she has to drink this intoxicating thing. And she was guilty, and she was accused and guilty. Her stomach implodes. If she's innocent, she becomes beautiful and bears children. But anyway, Rabbi Omer in the beginning of Masechta, if you look at the Torah, it says Nazir is right next to Sota. Two parshas are next to each other. By the way, the Masechtos are also right next to each other. Lomar lecha shekol haroah sota b'gil kula yazir atzman hayayin. Anyone who sees a sota in her lowest place in life, at the point in which she is sort of given into her taivos. So when you see this, you should refrain, if you can, from drinking wine. That's the recommendation of the Gemara. And if you look at the Rashba, the Rashbam and others, the Rashi and others, they explain that basically the assumption is that she must have had too much to drink, and that's why she's in this situation in the first place. So if you look where wine takes you, too much drinking brings you to a very bad place. So many examples in the Torah of what happens when we become intoxicated. We have the story of Noach, Vayesht min hayayin, Vayishkor vayidgal b'soch olo. I love this pasuk because it's by Noach in Surah 7. You look at the Vav, Vaya, right? Vayesht min hayayin, Vayishkor, Vayizgal. By the way, it's a separate interesting question. If the consequence of him getting drunk is he instantly is naked. Why that happens is a separate discussion. Like that's not like, I don't know, first l'chaim doesn't your clothing just pop off of you. Maybe the fifth heaping of cholent, maybe your clothing starts to explode off of you, but doesn't typically happen when you right when you drink. But the Torah seems to indicate that all of these terrible things that befell Noach were the consequence of drinking. We look at the story. Yaakov nasan la'esav. Yaakov gave to Esav lechem nizid adashim, bread, porridge, vayochal, vayesht, vayakam, vayelech, vayivez Esav his bechor. What do you see again in this pasuk? Vav. You can't miss the comparison. Now, what does Esav do? He squanders the bechorah. He gives up the firstborn rights for a bowl of porridge. But what is often missed in this verse is he also having a l'chaim. And everyone wants to know where did he get the l'chaim from, right? That wasn't on the menu when Yaakov was sitting, stirring his pot of stew. Where did the wine come from? And I've seen some explain that Esav carried around a little flask, right? That was Esav's thing. He had with him one of those little metal flasks, and he's like, okay, it's a good meal. And he took a swig. But the consequence of all of this impetuous behavior, including in that behavior is drinking wine, is Esav becomes willing to give up his birthright. Wine doesn't always play a negative role. There are psukim that extol the virtues of wine. Yain yisamach levav anosh. Wine rejoice. It brings a sad heart happiness. We find Malki Tzedek Melech Shalem when in source 9 when Avram Avinu is victorious in the war of the 4 and the 5 kings. Malki Tzedek Hotzi lechem yain tov v'yain vehu kolheim le'elyon. He brings out bread and wine, and they have a l'chaim. It's a wonderful exchange. And we assume that Avram Avinu, who doesn't subsequently become drunk and sell away this birthright or is maimed by children like Noach, we assume that he drinks responsibly.
Yeah. Is there anyone talk about the fact that at least wine was also a common drink, but also one that was elevated in terms of making things like Shabbat and
absolutely. I'm not going to go into it in depth here, but it goes without saying that we don't have Kiddush without wine. We don't have Havdalah. We don't have many of the mitzvos, Bris Milah and Pidyon HaBen, you name it. Almost every ritual that we have, you go to a wedding, what do? Right? You pull out a cup of wine. So it's like you cannot accomplish Kiddusha, sanctity, without a cup of wine, which is really interesting.
Right. I was tying it into your introduction where you said all the mitzvahs are sort of taken to an extreme. So tzedakah, which is common, is taken to an extreme. Eating is taken to an extreme. Wine, which would be a daily drink, is taken to an extreme. That's just trying to tie it to your beginning. That's where I was.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think the wine is of an extreme nature in this case.
Right.
That you have to become intoxicated. We never find the chiyuv to be intoxicated elsewhere. Right. And as we'll see in a moment, it's actually counter to the spirit of the Torah. Aviv shalach kezos asar chamorim nosim mituv mitzrayim ve'eser asonos nosas bar ve'lechem mazal la'aviv la'derech. Yaakov Avinu, Yosef rather, sends to Yaakov a special wagon that is laden with donkeys and bread and food and also mituv Mitzrayim, the best of Egypt. What was the best of Egypt, right? They made a really cool mezcal there. No, the best of Egypt. My mituv Mitzrayim, Amar Binyamin. Look at the source 11. Bar Yefes Amar Abelazar, Shalach lo yayin Yoshan. He sent old wine. Judaz Zakenim Nochim. And the old people, they love a good old wine. It's a geschmack. So they sent an old wine to his father, and that's, again, it's true. I want to point out what Mark said, is that that in ancient times, they didn't have many options for beverages, right? Water was simply not clean. So it was basically wine or meat or beer, right? But we see that the mere presence of wine isn't evil. The substance is not evil, right? That's the point I'm trying to make, right? It's not, but they didn't obviously have, you didn't have an option like it wasn't like you can send a Coca-Cola or what's the new one? What's the new Sprite? Whatever it's called. It's a weird name. They didn't have Mountain Dew as an option, so you only had wine. So, but why specify that they were drinking it? Because the object of wine is not evil. But on the other hand, the Gemara tells us, Shlosha Kadosh Baruch Hu Ovan, God loves three people. He loves everyone, but he really loves three people. Misha Eno Koes, someone who doesn't get angry. Misha Eno Mishtaker, doesn't get drunk. Misha Eno Ma'amid Al Midosav, and someone who doesn't, who is not Ma'amid Al Midosav, someone who's not makbid on their own kavod, right? And they don't, and someone insults them, like, okay, someone else had a bad day. They insult me. It's probably on them. So the point is that one of the three who HaKadosh Baruch Hu really loves is someone who refrains from becoming intoxicated. Calls into question, what are we doing on Purim? Now, the Gemara Pesachim tells us, Amar le Rab Chia B'rei lo tishtei sama, don't drink sama. This is the only reference I know of where the Gemara talks about not taking drugs. Rab Chia says to his son, don't do drugs, right? And Nancy Reagan, right, heard this and she made a whole campaign out of it. Lo tishaver nigara, lo ta'akir kar. These are different things that you shouldn't do for your health. What is tishtei sama? What is this sam? Rashbam, al tishtes samim mipnei shenikva lahem veset v'yehei libecha sholcha v'tafsid mos. You're gonna love it, and you're gonna ask for it more. What does that sound like? Your brain will develop a dependency and you're going to want more of it. And you're going to lose your money. And afilu l'refua lo tishtei im efshar l'refua acheres. Even for refua, you should avoid certain drugs if it's possible to use a less addictive form of a refua. The Rashbam is writing this many years ago, right? And what is he saying? He's saying that if you prescribe medications that are habit forming, then we're going to have a problem on our hands. So, we just discovered this maybe within the recent 10 years or so, 10, 15 years, but this is something that already it's a problem that's alluded to in the Rishonim. Now, I want to try to understand, given the negative press around substances, I want to understand a little bit of the approaches that exist to Adlo Yada, and there are many. And as long as the Gedolei Poskim embrace an approach, I want to say that all of those approaches are legitimate. All right? I want to repeat that. Anyone who speaks emphatically, you must drink, you must not drink, right? Those people are ignoring part of our Masorah. I think that's important to state, right? You can't just whitewash and ignore that these are not lightweights who talk about this. These are not just a couple of high school kids who are saying, "Oh, we got this special day. It's the drinking day," and they get all excited. They're trying to fulfill a mitzvah, as the Chazal indicate, and trying to make Kadosh Baruch Hu proud. So ultimately, all of these approaches are within the world of MS. And as we'll see, I think I could share an Mahalach, an approach that I think really does speak to the various types of situations that we have in our lives, in our families. So the Shulchan Aruch tells us, Chayiv inish levesume buryad l'yada, quotes the Gemara verbatim, ben Araham l'Aruch Mordechai. Good, Shulchan Aruch, like the Shulchan Aruch is Sephardic, right? You have to get drunk until you don't know the difference between Arahama and Baruch Mordechai. There's no equivocating. That's the obligation. He quotes the Gemara. The Ramah, Ramosha Israelis, in his Hagav, Vayesh Omrim, I'm here in source 15, De'ein sarach lishtaker kol kach, you don't have to get so drunk, Elashiyishte yoser milimudo, drink a little bit more than you're accustomed to drinking. That's the kolbo. V'yishan, and sleep. Umitoch sheyishan ena yodeh ben araham levarach morchai. Ma'aril. Once you fall asleep, you don't know the difference between Baruch Mordechai and Ar Haman. Perfect solution. You fulfill the mandate of Chazal, you drink a little bit, and you take a shlof. Now, I once saw a creative approach that the word Purya in Chazal, anybody know what the word Purya in the Gemara means? Purya means bed. So Chayav Inish L'Visumi B'Purya literally might mean you have to get intoxicated in bed. Again, let's keep our mind focused on what this probably means if you take that approach. Puria means Purim, but it could be like a nice approach to the Ramah that it means you're going to drink a little bit and you're going to go to bed. So fall asleep. Okay, good. So the Rambam, we have two approaches. One is literalist approach. One is no, drink a little bit more than you're used to, and then go to sleep. The Ramah is responding, and the Maharil writes this as well. That's a redactor of Ashkenazic minhag. So is the Kolbo, responding probably to the issue that we have here is that some of these, some of the references, most of the references to alcohol in the Torah are quite negative, especially when the extreme. I should point out one more historical note, two more actually. Everybody knows that the story of Lot and his daughters, and that when they thought the world was over, they felt they had to cohabit with their father to perpetuate humanity. So in order to do what they felt was necessary, they had to get him really drunk, and this happened twice, 2 nights in a row. So we see that the negative effect of intense intoxication certainly adds to this sort of the negative impact of drinking, but also drinking heavily. And also the Chazal have 4 opinions as to what exactly was the chet of Adama and Chava. What was the fruit that they took from the tree of knowledge? One approach is it was the esrog. Another approach it was wheat, because wheat gives knowledge. The Gemara says elsewhere. One is the fig. Fig is an obvious one because right when they discover that they're naked, they cover up with a fig leaf, which is a very big leaf, right? And so why was there a fig leaf there? Well, they were eating a fig tree. And the last approach is that, right, I have a hard time believing they ran around the garden looking for a fig tree after they realized they were naked. And then the last approach is is that it was actually the grape. That the tree of knowledge was the grape, and linked into the mystique of the grape is both kedusha and tuma, is both purity and negativity, and the fact that they sinned with the grape also adds to this whole story. Now, we have the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. How far do you have to go? Ad Lo Yada, or maybe not that far. The Rambam has a pretty literalist approach. Prepare a nice feast. He says, drink until you're drunk and then collapse in drunkenness. So that would, the Shulchan Aruch would match up with that Rambam. But I want to highlight, I think, probably the biggest argument against this literalist approach for a moment. And what would be that argument? Everybody knows that Rabbah or Rava, who just advocated for drinking a ton on Purim, the Gemara has a story. A Maaseh Rav, Rabbah of Rabbi Zera, source 17. Rabbi Zera avdu sudas Purim b'hadi adadi. They decided to have their Su'udah together. They were good friends. So he said, come to my Su'udah. Ivsum, and they became intoxicated. Kam Rabbah got up. Shachte le Rabbi Zera. Now you see why they changed the girsa earlier from Rava to Rabbah, because this story is about Rabbah. Rabbah got up. He slaughtered Rabbi Zera. He killed him. Lemachar ba'irachme. The next day he davened. He said, Hashem, I missed my friend. It's like Achashverosh. He woke up the next day, realized he killed Vashti, but he wasn't as lucky. He kills Rabbi Zera lemachar ba'irachme va'achye. and Rabbi Zera came back to life. Baruch Hashem. So Lashana, the next year, what happened? Sorry. The next year, Amar Le Nesi Marv and Avid Sudas Purim Badi Adadi. Let's have our Purim Suda again together. It was so much fun last year. Remember that? So Amar Le Lo B'chol Shaita V'Shaita Misrachesh Nisa. No. Rabbah, not every year a miracle happens. You killed me last year, right? Shame on you. Kill me this year, shame on me. I don't want to be murdered again. So what would you conclude? I'll just give the floor to anyone who wants to be bold enough to unmute themselves and to give me what they would conclude if they wanted to put on their posek hat, your halachic decider hat. You read this story. What would you say the halacha is? Rava or Rabbah says you have to drink till you're completely drunk, intoxicated on Purim, till you don't know the difference between Baruch, Mordechai, or Haman. And the Gemara tells a story that Rabbah got up and he killed Rabbi Zera. So what is the Gemara trying to tell you?
I feel like it sounds like they're saying then that drinking caused him to murder someone.
And what should the halacha be?
Don't drink because don't murder.
Right. Okay. So very good. So the Gemara seems to be rejecting the halacha that we said earlier. Yeah, the poskim don't. Yeah.
Well, but isn't there? I'll take the other side just for sport a little bit. I think there's a spot where there's excess, but not too much excess. Meaning, you can say, "Look, I'm going to give Mishlach Manot, and I'm going to just give it to anybody. I'm going to give it to anybody who comes on Purim." But you give all your money away, and that's not what the Torah wants either. So there's a point at which
you
excess
have to moderate, and Rabbah took it too far.
Right. I think there's a sweet spot that's excess, which is relative to what your norm is. You know, if you normally don't drink, having 6 glasses of wine is a big excess. But
let me ask you a question. Do you remember the commercial, Mark? The Tootsie Roll Pop. How many licks does it take to get the center Tootsie Roll Pop?
Absolutely.
2,
100%.
3. Actually, I got an email from my kid's teacher the other day. Said we were for the 100th day of school in Ari Crown, and they were advertising. They were teaching things about 100. They wanted to know if 100 licks can get you to the center. And
it doesn't.
The teacher,
I try to remember. It doesn't.
The teacher wasn't careful about it and found like a fake link, a fake video of this spoof, and it was like filled with obscenities. And the teacher sent an apology. And I said, Adir, I said, what happened in school today? Oh, the teacher showed a video that sweared. It was a great moment. But after they sent the email out, I spent like 20 minutes looking, just looking on YouTube for the video. I wanted to see it myself. Anyway, so I'm human, right? Anyway, so the what was I doing, right? Why was I saying that? Because right, how many, I forgot what the point was now. Hold on 1 second.
Excess. So Daniela said that excess is bad. That was your take.
And you said moderation.
I was saying that because you have both,
right?
You have the Gemara saying you have excess, and then trying to define excess as too much. And you're.
I was remembering this because I was thinking like, so how would you define excess or too much versus where's that point? And the reason why, it almost seems impossible is because the Gemara says you have to drink until you don't know the difference between Baruch, Mordechai, or Haman, which is like a strange standard, right? Like, is there a point in which have you ever gotten to the point of drinking so much where, okay, now I don't know the difference. Test me now. I still know it. Test me again. It's probably the last thing to go before you black out, most likely, right? So what's excess in that case, right? That's what I'm having trouble understanding. All right, so, but I appreciate you taking that side because a lot of our poskim do take that side. So the Baal HaMaor, for whom my son is named, writes, Idchile memra de Rabba v'leis hilchasa kivase v'lav shapir dami lemeder hachi. The Baal HaMaor says, it's obvious by the fact that the Gemara quotes this tragic story that the halacha rejects completely the idea that one has to get completely drunk. The Magen Avraham says, Yesham shelo yada lachshov she'ar Haman v'gematria Baruch Mordechai. If you calculate the gematria of Ar Haman and Baruch Mordechai, they're equal. So you get so drunk you can't figure out the gematria. Okay, that's already a lesser a lesser level. That's what it means. And some, I think some say it refers to not being able to recite the whole piyut of Shoshanas Yaakov, that you forget the words, which most people already don't know the words before they're drunk.
Fold this
Oh, that's fine, I got that. That's like me with,
So most people don't know the words before they're drunk. So that's the Baruch Mordechai Arahaman song. Okay, so whatever version you take here, it's a moderation. It's saying, well, we didn't mean literally. It means you don't know how to calculate Arahaman equals Baruch Mordechai. Fine. I do want to share, I'll share it outside, the Or Chadash. Who's the Or Chadash? That's the Maharal of Prague. That's his work on Purim. And the Or Chadash writes a beautiful concept. He says, to understand what's going on here with this mandate to become drunk, he says that Yom Kippur and Purim are actually sister holidays, right? Because Kippurim and Purim. And Yom Kippur, our goal is to completely ignore the Hanas Haguf, the pleasure of the body. We don't eat, we don't drink, no marital relations, no leather, right? No anointing our skin, no washing, to arrive at a spiritual height. And the goal of Purim is to do so by indulging in the body until the body it doesn't exist anymore. Until the body is sort of like a little bit disparaged or disgraced, until you're just a spiritual entity. Right? So if I become so drunk that I'm on the floor, my body doesn't work anymore. I can't walk a straight line. I can't do the test that they always make me take when they pull me over. And I can't calculate advanced mathematical equations because my body and my mind are shut down, and therefore I'm only spiritual. Now, why do we go from the opposite angle? Because in Yom Kippur, of course, the Malach HaMavis, is challenging HaKadosh Baruch Hu, challenging us based on our spiritual deeds. So we want to prove we're entirely spiritual. We don't need physical, right? And who we are physically, spiritually. So that's the perspective in Yom Kippur. Purim, Haman wanted to kill us physically. So we indulge in the physical. We say we're alive. Look at us. Until all we are is a physical, until the physical falls apart. But we indulge in the physical. But either way, that's the Maharal's approach on the mitzvah of drinking. The Gemara in Shabbos tells us something else really interesting that the Chassam Sofer picks up on. And I want to share this, and this will be our segue into the third part of the shir. The Gemara in Shabbos tells us, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. The Gemara is talking about mazalos. What are mazalos? Mazalos are basically constellations or your astrological reading, right? Capricorn or Leo and Sagittarius, and all the various different astrological signs. And the Gemara is telling us that even though they dictate who we are and which star or constellation we're born under, nonetheless, Jewish people have the capacity to rise above their tendencies, their natural tendencies. You might be born under a certain star, a certain month with certain kochos and deficiencies. You have things that you're really attracted to and things that you're just really turned off by. You have things that draw you in. That's all your mazel. But the Gemara says, Ein mazel Yisrael. In the end, it's Ein mazel Yisrael. But before the Gemara points out that the Jewish people can rise above their tendencies, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak has a stunning statement. He says, Hai man demadim gever ashid dama. If you are born Ma'adim is like Saturn, right? Like you like blood. You're red. You're like a David HaMelech. You're ruddy and you're an Esav, right? So what should you do? You should become a bloodletter, aka doctor, right? You should become a doctor. Amar Rav Ashi, umna igenava. Yeah, you could do something really good, could be a bloodletter, or you could end up becoming a thief. Itabacha, you could be a butcher or a mohel, right? You may end up doing great things, right? Like a butcher, wonderful. If you're comfortable with blood, be a shochet or be a mohel. Now, I don't exactly want to advocate that if you have this overwhelming urge to draw blood, that your first line of work should be a mohel. I don't know that I would want Jeffrey Dahmer to be my kid's mohel, but the Gemara is saying that the same urges, the same desires can be channeled. for good or for bad. I'm a Rabbah. Now, this is the critical part I want to show you. Rabbah knows what month he's born in. He's born in. I'm a Rabbah. Ana b'madim havai. I was born with this blood thirst. I like blood. I'm Rabbaye. Mar nami anishakatil. Be careful, because you will get yourself into trouble. Who's Rabbah? Hello, this is a totally different Gemara. Do you remember this guy? He invited Rabbi Zera to a Su'udah and he killed him. And what did Abaye said? Be careful. So the Chassam Sofer says, anyone who's fulfilling the mitzvah of Purim, that person, right? Such a person who's fulfilling the mitzvah of Purim, that person is protected by the mitzvahs. In fact, there's a Shitas of Tosfos that says that if a person drinks on Purim and they damage someone's property, you're putter because you damaged it, you broke the person's table or chair or cabinet out of Simchas Purim. But the Chassam Sofer takes it to the core of this halacha. He says that you are supposed to, or may, and supposed to drink seriously on Purim as long as you don't know that you are born with this tendency, right? If your whole life you'd be fascinated by blood and like you were dissecting squirrels in your backyard, you probably don't want to be drinking ever. That's what the Chassam Sofer says. But if you are not a madim, right? And he's explaining this in the name of Rabbeinu Ephraim, then you are protected by Haganat HaMitzvah. It's a new army, the Haganat HaMitzvah. You're protected by the wings of the mitzvah. And anyone else who doesn't know if they're madim or not, let's say you don't know when you're born, you don't know what your natural tendencies are. Take an 18-year-old kid in yeshiva in Israel, and the Rebbe puts him on the table, and he starts, so what do? Basaruba b'shomer b'sayim Hashem. Majority, God watches after fools. If you are a fool and you know that you like blood, then God doesn't watch after you. But if you don't know, God will look after you. You'll probably be all right. That's the Chassam Sofer's shikul, his balance on this halacha.
Rabbi Gelman, this is Bob.
Yes.
Before we leave this subject, it seems to me that when you were talking about the Maharal and getting close to Hashem through indulgence, isn't it possible, at least, that you have phrases like Nichnas Yayin Yatsa Sod, that sometimes wine actually stimulates people intellectually, and so
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Is it not possible that he may have meant that as well?
I think so. I mean, it's a very lengthy. I believe he quotes that as well later on, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, for sure. I think you're 100% on target. And Yain Yisamach Levav Enosh, wine brings a person sad. They drink a little bit. David HaMelech, right, drinks when he suffers a loss in his family, his son. So you see that wine plays an important role in gladdening a heart, and sometimes even getting rid of a little bit anxiety, a little bit of people are intimidated, right? The social lubricant to an extent. I think I'm forgetting my brother's mnemonic that he came up with, but I don't remember if it was. I know he came up with it, but he learned this in school. But it was like sort of the stages of drunkenness. It was verbose is the first one, right? And right, you become more chatty, right? More comfortable talking to people, and maybe even yatzasod, maybe the verbal articulation. And then there's more bellicose, moros, depressed, and then eventually comatose, which is the last one. So those are the stages of alcohol consumption. Okay, so I want to move into what I think is my recommendation. And my recommendation is not going to tell you what to do, because I believe that once you have the poskim and there's the Masorah, but my recommendation actually, and I must confess that I do drink on Purim. I do take it very, quite seriously. I hope I don't drive my car. I hope I don't embarrass anyone. I hope I don't hurt anyone's feelings. I go to sleep, probably before I end up not knowing the difference between Baruch Mordechai and Har Haman. And as the years go by, I probably drink less and less because my body's not able to hold up, right? So, but I want to share what I think is an approach, because there are many people for whom alcohol presents a very big problem, right? And understand that we have a cultural phenomenon which ends up encouraging perhaps the people who the Chassam Sofer referred to as the people who shouldn't be, the ma'adim types, drinking to drink. And I think more and more the thinking in the world of addiction and alcohol and substances is not that substances are bad or good. It's not the thinking. And it's not even that they're people, the individuals who do so irresponsibly are diseased or problematic. That's the old mentality. There was a joke comedians to say, alcoholism is a disease. It's a disease people yell at you for having. Like, could you imagine, like, what's wrong with you? You have lupus. Get a hold of yourself. Like, no one would ever say that. So it's not the diseased individual, but instead, I think there's a sort of a happy medium, which is that people abuse substances not because of other people, but it certainly is exacerbated by that. We learn to see problems not just through the lens of the individual who is sort of a deviant, the individual who is the problem person, who is the ma'adim, as the Chassam Sofer says, but rather the person is a product of an environment, of a society, of a culture, of a shul, of a family, of a friend group. And therefore, when we want to help someone who has a problem, what we try to do is we try to address the entire environment from which they emerge, right? Their whole system. And that's really a lot of the current thinking on how to help people who are these ma'adims. It's not like, well, you're a ma'adim, well, you stay away. And anyone who's not a ma'adim, you guys can participate in that's not practical. It's not a practical solution to an issue which really is pervasive, right? And so I want to share how this really factors in the Megillah. Esther Perikal, Vashtia Kedas Einonis. It's a very interesting pasuk. Drinking was Kedas. What's a das? What's Dalid tough? Das it's not German. Das is sprockets, right? What is das? Shtia Kedas. Das is a religion. Shtia was it was the law of the land. We say Kedash Moshe Yisrael and get married. The law of the land was drinking. And then, ain't onus. But we didn't force you. It was the rule, but you didn't have to do it. Look what it says. Because everyone in this great democracy can do whatever he pleases. Everyone who wants to party, you can party. Not an issue. So drinking is the mandated way of the land. However, we're not going to force you. Because whatever anyone wants, they do. Look at Rav Amos Chacham's commentary. Rav Amos Chacham, I was introduced to him in college by Rav Morty Cohn, who was one of the heads of the Bible department in YU. And he is one of the most incredible mefarshim in the Das Mikra series, right? This beautiful series. If you come in the morning and learn, Mark and I are there, among others, and a few others, and you come and learn in the morning, you can learn Nach Yomi every day, and you can use the Das Mikra as well with us. So that's for davening. Okay, so Rav Amos Chacham says, ones, by the way, which means force or rape, right? They didn't rape you to drink wine, but they forced you, but they didn't force you. Ain't ones. They didn't force them to drink more than they wanted to. Perish acher, another explanation. So they would not stop you, prevent you from drinking at your limit. So two approaches. Either they didn't force you to drink or they didn't prevent you. Now, why is this important? Why are these two approaches important? Because the first one, I think, is impractical. Having a big feast where everybody sits around on a table and drinks, and then you say, well, we're not going to force you. It's basically labeling someone the wet towel of the group, right? So the second approach actually is really fascinating to me. We're not going to stop you and tell you you've had enough. It's really interesting how that factors in. So look at Esther, Parak Gimel. Where's the word dot come up again? Haman is ranting like a lunatic about the Jews, and he says there's this nation, yeshno am echad mifgar v'varar anamim, chavetz machusecha v'dateim shonot mikol am ve'et datei hamelech einam osim. They have their own religion, and they don't keep their own religion. They don't keep the king's religion. It's not worth it for you to keep them around. He speaks in code language. If you want to see a absolutely jarring and difficult film, there was a film called, I think, Conspiracy. It was about the minutes in the Wannsee Conference Center when the Nazis came up with the final solution. And I think the movie is the exact length of the conference itself. And there's a whole 10 minutes or so where they're using code language about what they mean to do to the Jews, exterminating the Jews. And they're actually taking this from the minutes. They ain't shavel anicham. Don't leave them around, he says. Don't leave the Jews. But look at this. Dateim shonot mikol am ve'etatei hamelech einam osim. Their religion, their values, their religions are different. Now, we just finished saying that in this great democracy, Ken Yisad Hamelech Al Kol Rab Beisol Lasos Kirtzon Ish V'ish. Everybody does whatever they want. But Shtia Kedas. Drinking is the religion, but do whatever you want. Is that a practical solution? Can you have an expected mode of conduct and then say, but do whatever you want? Can you say, well, there's a speed limit, suggested speed limit on the Autobahn of 70 miles an hour, but do whatever you like? Can you have a museum, suggested donation, $15, but whatever, you don't really have to. Remember Homer Simpson went to a museum and he tried to retrieve money from a suggested donation box at the museum because it was only a suggestion. Shtia Kedas. This is the way we behave, but ain't honest. Do what you want. What does Haman pick up on? Their das is not your das. This should be immaterial. He should say, but who cares if their das is mine different than their das? That's because dat meant you keep to the protocol. You do what we do here in Rome. And to the extent that we tolerate variation, it's very limited. Case in point, in the very first chapter, when Vashti attempts to have her own feast, which was within her right as Kirtzon Ish V'ish, she's killed for it. Because you really cannot, that's the irony of Shushan. We pretend on the outside, we give lip service to freedom and freedom of choice, and everybody does whatever they want, but at the end of the day, we don't really mean it. It's a really powerful message in the Megillah. Now take a look at this last component that I want to share with you. What does it say? We read this verse, and they drank in these golden vessels, different glorious vessels, wine, abundant wine in the hand of the king. It's a hard verse to interpret. What does the Medrash tell us? Everybody knows this Medrash. Source 27. They pulled out Kalim of the Beit HaMikdash, and we talked about this in one of our other shiurim. And those Kalim, the vessels from the temple that were conquered by the Babylonians and were taken by the Persians or the Babylonians, and they're parading around in the big day Kehuna Gedola. They're wearing the high priesthood's garb, the holy garb, and they're having a drunk frat party with women dancing. And we read this verse, V'chelim mikelim shonim, right, to the tune of Eicha. There's a famous joke, right? Why do they read this verse to Eicha on Purim? It's a happy day. So the answer is so Yekis could be happy on Purim. German Jews are known to be a little more serious, but then the joke gets even deeper. I think Rabbi Warsh was sharing this with me. So if that's the case, why don't we read the whole Megillah to the tune of Eicha? And the answer is that would be hololos. That would be silly already. All right. So it's if you know this joke, it's a very deep and it cuts deep. It's a very cruel joke. So we won't. All right. Anyway, this is a famous medrash, but the Alshech HaKadosh actually has a different approach. He says, what was going on here? There's a few perushim in the Alshech. It's a lengthy piece. He says, the goal, the agenda of Achashverosh was to get everybody to really be like him, his das, his culture. So how do you do that? How do you get everyone to conduct themselves like that? How do you create a culture of drinking? These were officers. These weren't back alley brown paper bag people, right? These are people who are going to watch what they're drinking, right? They're going to be, maybe they'll have a pinky out when they hold their cup, and they're going to talk with British accents, and they're all fancy. They're not going to get drunk. How do you get them to drink? So it's brilliant what he does. He brings out different kalim. Look at source 28, the last source. Ach tit orer tavato lahosifim in the third line. So yesh second line. Yesh gam sheyishte al yodo o al yedei zulato lo yarbelo rak pamim shalosh kedarko beveto yoter mat. He has a little nightcap, a drink or two. Ach tis orer tavato. But how do you do that? You make him taste a little bit, and then you awaken his desires. Lahosifam min hago to eat, drink a little more. Kitin because zav eno. Because he put in a gold cup. Makes it really exciting. And then, Umagam Yeh Mitzur Kaftorim, they had another one that had beautiful prachim, flowers and little designs, and those swirly gig things, or whatever they're called, right? Different designs, paisley. Achtis Orer, so Va'af Gam Bezos Efshar Yakutz Beruboy, Imlo Shiyeh Hayayim Meshuvach Meod, even if the wine wasn't that good. How do you get people to drink bad alcohol? Look at the tequila industry. It's cheap garbage. How do you get people to pay a lot of money for it? First of all, you have to be a retired basketball player. And second of all, you buy you put it in a fancy bottle. And everyone's, ooh, you got the 1275, you got the this one, you got the Don Julio, whatever. I don't know what they're talking about. But you got to get the fancy stuff. And they're so impressed. You get normal, healthy people to adopt an unhealthy attitude around alcohol by making it sociable and culturally acceptable and delectable and the cool thing to do. And in the article, I spoke about a few different things that we do. We throw in Yiddishisms. Ooh, have some mashke, have some yosh, have a l'chaim. Come on, celebrate. We created a culture that doesn't use alcohol as a religious piece, but rather which turns alcohol into the centerpiece. And what Achashverosh did was he created it as a social tool, not just social lubricant. This was the goal of the Su'uda, to get people drunk, says the Alshich. Now, why we celebrate Purim doing the exact same thing, larger discussion, but we did establish so far that there are those people for whom drinking is a non-starter. Ma'adim, we call them people with addictive qualities, people who know that when they take a substance like an alcohol, it's very dangerous for them. And we also know that the holiday of Purim is a day that the Manos Halevi, Rav Shlomo Halevi Alkapetz, the author of the Lechol Dodi, writes, is a day that is rooted in the mitzvah of Reos Achtos, camaraderie, brotherhood, responsibility for one another. And so while we fulfill our mitzvah in whatever way we choose based on our poskim, based on our approach that we have outlined for us here, there cannot be a blissful ignorance about the other people for whom it's dangerous. That cannot be the case. Because when we make it about that, I talked about advertisements by foodies and these food magazines, and the centerpiece of every magazine is booze. And even the halakhic discussions about alcohol are fascinating. We talk about yain nesech, we talk about stam yenam, we talk about tarovis issues. It's great halakhic discussion. But is this the main article? Or is this just another interesting halakhic kashrus issue? And everything surrounding alcohol at the centerpiece, I think, is the attitude that really becomes problematic for the people for whom the Chassam Sofer refers to, are the people who don't know they're fools, right? Or the people who rather know they have a problem, or who do have a problem. And we have a social responsibility. And I think that I don't know how to square it. And that's something that, Shir doesn't give you advice on how to do Seichel HaYashar. This is just some of the tidbits here. But conversations about about how not to make this the centerpiece, how not to make that the whole thing, but rather a means of part of a holiday as a whole of Simcha. And on Shabbos, a means of Kedusha, and at a wedding, a means of achieving holiness. If your goal always has to be, let me bring holiness to the world, I want to add one more definition of holiness. One of the holiest things we could do is to love our fellow man. One of the holiest things we could ever do is to be concerned that we are not going to willfully or even accidentally cause a fellow, a friend, a fellow Jew or a fellow man to, God forbid, go down a path that maybe they've spent 5-10 years trying to avoid. And it's the socialization of alcohol that is the most nefarious part of Achashverosh's gathering. And I think that is something that, regardless of the path we choose, something we ought to think about and consider as we conduct ourselves, both in general in Jewish life and on Purim as a whole. And I wish everyone a Chag Purim Sameach. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take questions. Otherwise, we will close it out.
Shkoch, thank you so much.
Chag Sameach.
Sameach.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.